guys, and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about what happens to a bioactive tank after you see it put together in a video or online. It all looks all cool. What actually happens, the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm also going to let you know how Rex is getting on in here, as well as reasons why your bioactive tank may fail. So let's start with that, because I get a lot of messages from people who have said, look, I've tried to do a bioactive tank, it failed straight away, what am I doing wrong? So number one, drainage. Now, some people can get away with not using a drainage layer, but ideally if you can include one, that's going to be better. There's going to be air around the roots, so water can wash it away, and so ideally include a drainage layer. Number two, the choice is substrate. Now, I used Earth Mix and the Habitat Bio, I'll put a picture of it here, in this tank, and that works really well for me. It's not available everywhere, so some people might use organic topsoil, something that doesn't have fertilizers in, but if you're using something like cocoa fiber, that's more of a filler substrate. Now there's going to be some things like, I don't know, a snake plant, you can't really kill a snake plant, that might survive in it. But things aren't going to really thrive in that kind of substrate. You can use it to bulk out the area, but if you're using something just like that, you're probably not going to get great growth from your plants. And the third reason is lack of lighting. Now you might not have a light at all, or maybe you have a UV lamp and you think that will do. That's light, that will help them grow. But actually you do need a growth light, and I use Illuminized Jungle Dawn and it has done amazing. So there are lots of different options out there, but that's personally what I use. But let's get on to Rex's tank, and the first thing I'm going to talk about is watering, because when I put together this tank, if you haven't seen that build, I will link it, but when I first put it together, I did a hefty water on it. I usually do this with tanks I've just set up, and I will say since setting this up, I have probably watered it 3 or 4 times with a watering can. Now obviously I do mist it because I have a pink-tongued skink in here, so he needs that. But in terms of a full water, I've only done it 3 or 4 times. And that's because it's better for the tank to be too dry than waterlogged. Because if it's a bit too dry, you're like, okay, I can just add a bit of water to this. But if it's waterlogged, plants can rot and the whole system can go terribly wrong. And that's the kind of thing you should know about bioactive systems. Similar to if you've ever set up an aquarium, you know that aquariums need to cycle. And so for some people, they will set up a tank and leave it for a while before they move in their animal. I sometimes do that if I haven't got the animal already, but if I have the animal already and I don't have room for that old tank, I will move them straight in. But that just means maybe it takes a little bit of time for the plants to settle in. But let's talk about the plants, let's talk about the good. So this is the umbrella plant or umbrella tree, and this was originally in Drogo's tank, and it outgrew that tank, and I think I took it out, it was out of the tank maybe for 6 months or more. And then I moved it in here because, as you can see, plenty more room for it to grow. And it has grown. There's new life sprouting out on it everywhere. And actually, this hasn't wilted at all. Whenever you put in a new plant, which we'll get to in a moment, sometimes that happens, but this has been very sturdy, it's growing well. It also holds Rex's weight very easily, and he's just over 100 grams, so he can actually climb it, which is awesome. And it just creates a nice area in such a big tank as well. If you didn't know, it's like a 170-gallon tank. So this whole space is taken by this plant, and I'm very happy about it. Now let's talk about the bad, because when you set up some tanks, it's likely that there's going to be some plants that don't thrive and some plants that unfortunately just die. And that happened with the Begonia Rex that I put in here. After the first few days I could tell it wasn't doing too well, and so I moved it out. Unfortunately it didn't recover, and what's really annoying, it is one of the few plants I actually bought for this tank. Most of these are plants that are in other terrariums, plants I propagated, but the Begonia went out, and I actually replaced it with this fern. Now this fern was originally in Bruce, my blue-tongued skink's tank. However, where it was placed was right under the light and right near the heat. And ferns love shade. So it was a very flat fern. It was starting to get its leaves singed a little bit, which you can kind of see on the old leaves on here. But since moving in here, it has stretched out, it has grown nicely, the old leaves are now dying away, so we took a bad and turned it into a good. Okay, let's now talk the ugly, because as I said, when you put in plants, it's very likely that they're going to wilt a little bit, and one of them that I almost definitely knew was going to do it was the golden pothos, because if you remember, I basically ripped that out of Rex's old tank, and there were so many aerial roots and just vines, and it looked a bit of a mess when putting it in here, so I actually, I buried some of the vines and I thought that might rot, the plant might suffer. However, there are so many aerial roots that it will probably be fine, and if anyone knows golden pothos, they are very decent plants to have in a terrarium because they can take a lot. So as you can see, some of them have already wilted, and this is probably going to be the case. And on one side, some of these wilted so bad they went black. However, I knew the golden pothos would come back, and as you can see, we have two gloriously, actually there's a third one coming from behind it, gloriously big leaves with that lovely golden coloration on there. And that's what I expected from this plant. So although it did wilt, I knew it would come back, and we've even got new growth deep down where I buried those vines, so it's great to see. I'm sure in no time the pothos will once again take over. The other thing is the polka dot begonia. So this was quite a leggy plant to begin with, and it was difficult to support because it's like there's not much going on down here, it's just very tall, and I think one of them has tried to grow into one of the hides, but it's kind of failing. So this one's a bit touch and go. I have seen new leaves on it. It might survive. I think, you know, I think it just needs a bit of TLC. Now for some honourable mentions. If you remember, I 3D printed a planter for this plant. In the past, I've tried to include plants up the background, but I've planted them in cork bits, or I've tried to use an actual plant pot, and they've just died, whereas this one's doing well. It's still growing, it's still looking healthy, it hasn't lost any leaves. I've only watered it maybe 2 or 3 times since it moved in, and it drains away perfectly fine, so that's great. The other thing is the palms. So these were from Rex's old tank, and I didn't really know how they'd do. I just put them in here just so, you know, they have a chance. And this one has got very big. And then there's some that are a bit smaller, but it's a nice different texture in here, and they are still alive, so can't complain at that. So, you may be wondering now, how is Rex doing? He is currently, what I assume, in brumation, or partial brumation. He's testing it out for size. He has found the tiniest hide, something that I didn't even intend to be a hide, I thought it was just a decoration on the background, to be his home. And it's this tiny bit of cork at the back. He has loads of cork hides in here, doesn't use them, not yet, not at the moment. He wants to find the tiniest one. So note to self, and note to anyone else building a tank for a pink tongue skink, smaller the better with the cork hides, although with any kind of tube hide you use, just make sure if you had to, you could break it open, just in case for some reason they wedge themselves in there. But he's a very slender gecko, so he doesn't really have an issue. But he spends at the moment most of his time down here, and occasionally I'll find him out. And when I do find him out, that's when I feed him. So as I said, he's kind of in that brumation stage where he is staying in a cooler area, sleeping most of the time, not eating as much. But that's quite normal for a skink this time of the year. He's still maintaining his weight really well, so it's not a concern. But prior to this, I would find him everywhere. He really liked being tucked up here initially, but he'll spread all along under his heater. He'll climb here, climb in his tree, even up his little, what I like to call Rex's chimney. This hide was from his old tank. He likes hanging out here. I haven't really seen him in this one, and I do wonder if it's because it's a dead end, you know, so it's a bit like, oh, if there's a predator in there, who knows. But I definitely love the fact I gave him all this room, even if right now, and probably throughout winter, he's going to just remain here and come out occasionally. It's just so nice to give him the option to move around. So anyway, I hope this has helped. I hope you can see that it's not always perfectly, you know, tanks change and cycle and plants die and things grow. It's a whole process, and every part of it is very interesting. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and goodbye.